How are you?
The campaign is in full swing. Just 1 week.
More than full swing.
More than full swing, but a massive chunk of the population has already voted.
Yeah, this is a real phenomenon, this historic election. Combination of things going on. We have seen massive record numbers of early voting turnout. And by early voting, we mean people who do what's called in-person, physically present, absentee ballot voting. They go to a site and vote early. And people who mail in their postal ballots. And it's a combination of people wanting to vote safely because of the coronavirus pandemic, not have to physically go to polls. Other people who just simply want to avoid the overcrowding of Election Day. They want to get it done early, but also the passion of this election, which has really been pitched and cast as perhaps the most important election of Americans' lifetime, between two candidates that are really polar opposites. So a lot of, on both sides, a lot of enthusiasm, and it's driving the numbers. Now, what you have is 66. Can we show those numbers? This is according to the United States Election Project, and they compile numbers on the number of early ballots and early voters. As of this morning, Tuesday morning, 66 million plus. That's actually going up as I speak. Early ballots have been cast, and what's amazing about that is half of those ballots, about half of them, are in a dozen or so of the most competitive states, because you have the Electoral College, because the U.S. election is not determined by the number of people who vote, the popular vote, but by the electoral vote. It comes down to a handful of these competitive states. So it's significant that almost half, tens of millions of these ballots are in these most competitive states right now. So you have a lot of early voting in these battleground states. And what's really interesting, states like Texas have already seen about 87%. The early voting is 80% of the total ballots cast in the last election. So if you just count the number of early ballots that have already, it's almost 8 million in Texas already. That's almost the totality of all the votes cast in that state back in 2016. And a lot of other states are following similar types of patterns right now. A real phenomenon, this election.
So what can we make of these large numbers of voters that have already gone to the polls?
It begins with a caveat. First of all, don't make too much of it. The conventional wisdom is, early voting. That means all the Democrats are turning out. That means it's good for Joe Biden. Yes, but no, because it's more subtle than that. You can't, on the surface, predict any outcomes from early voting. It is very true that Democrats are more eager. They tend to be more eager about early voting than Republicans. A lot of that has to do with the very diametrically opposed views between Democrats and Republicans, very broad brushstroke generalization in their approach to coronavirus. The Republicans are more inclined to turn out in person on Election Day and vote. That is when Donald Trump is hoping to get the big numbers there. So the Republicans are looking at all these early voting numbers, and it's true that in some cases there's been many higher numbers, at least in states that report the party registration of voters. Millions of more Democrats have voted than Republicans in this early voting drive. But like I said, you have to take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, because the Republicans do tend to turn out in droves on voting day, which is one of the reasons why you keep having Trump, tweeting to the effect that the vote must stop on November 3rd. He is counting on that physical in-person vote on the actual day itself. I'll just note some officials are taking measures, Delano, in certain states like Texas. The Republican governor there is trying to make it harder to vote early by only having one drop-off box in each of the counties. Some counties have millions of people.
Let's talk about mail-in ballots, because the Supreme Court has made a ruling on mail-in ballots in the state of Pennsylvania.
Yes. Democrats and civil rights groups had requested, and they brought this case to the Supreme Court, basically to be able to extend the deadline for being able to count mail-in ballots in the swing state, the pivotal state of Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin is so important because Donald Trump narrowly won that state in 2016 and helped give him the election, that along with Michigan and Pennsylvania. He is shown in most of the polls right now trailing in Wisconsin. So the fact the Supreme Court has now basically blocked this bid to be able to count the mail-in ballots for it was up to 6 days after Election Day, November 3rd. That is, in the view of a lot of the people who brought this case, it basically disenfranchises voters. The Democrats say it essentially disenfranchises endangered voters, people who would not have felt safe being able to go vote in person, and it essentially deprives them of a vote. The Republicans dismiss that out of hand. They say this is nothing about disenfranchising voters. That is democratic, malarkey, as Joe Biden might say. This is only about they don't want to be judicial activists deciding election rules so close to Election Day. They don't want judges rewriting election rules. They say they should leave it to state and elected officials officials in each of the states to decide these things. But at the end of the day, the fact of the matter is it risks that thousands, perhaps even tens of thousands of votes fewer might potentially be counted as a result of this decision. You have to have marked your ballots. The Democrats right now getting out, trying to tell people, vote now, vote quickly, get your ballots in by November 3rd, or else they won't be counted.
We'll see what happens. It's going to be a tough one. Doug, thank you very much for that. Douglas Herbert there.